itself. So sometimes people say, yeah, but we're confusing the aspect of real-time between the complex event processing dimension and cross-selling, where you just need to look up certain things, and that's a whole different problem that we're trying to solve. The variability is basically where we put most of the traditional relational model under stress, because you can't model very easily things such as tweets or feeds of other things, because the variety in what you get in there, and this is where we enter into the domain of basically the semi-structured, it just doesn't make sense to completely model these things. It's not flexible enough. So you need more flexibility in the schema, which means that is again not something you can do with your good old relational database. There you have a hard time doing that. So again, if you have this kind of information, don't just try to model it and store it into a traditional database. It typically doesn't have a very good success. There is a huge impact on the governance aspect of that, because if you try to make sense of these variable things, what I did, I found a tweet, and the tweet says, damn, my hashtag Z10 broke down a second time this week. Can anybody tell me what that sentence would mean? If somebody says to you, my Z10 broke down. The BlackBerry, of course, yeah. Now, in this case, the whole company breaks down, but that's another story. But it could be a car. It could be a BMW Z10. Or it could be the Motorola phone Z10. So what we're seeing is that what we're actually getting out of that tweet, if you are Motorola or if you're IBM or BMW, does that affect you or not? It gets really interesting if an IBM salesman drives his BMW to his work to take a picture of the new mainframe. Because then you put all 4 dimensions together and you use no way of knowing what's going on. So what you see is that the ability to actually make sense of this is not very easy. Especially if you have limited data, then this is not going to be enough to actually make a good decision on that. So the point is that when you look at these kind of things, what would be somebody that does master data management, what would be your first reaction? Or if you're into data governance, what would be your first reaction? I need to define an owner, I need to define the quality rules, I need to define the set of all possible hashtags that can be done. That's your first reaction. And what would be the second reaction? Okay, that would mean that I would have to have people actually be in contact and saying, dear sir, what did you mean by Z10? Can we help you? So this model doesn't work. So we need statistical relevance to actually make sense of these things. And that brings us into the aspect of veracity. Say, how do I handle this data set? And I guess everybody that has ever done a little bit of statistics knows the story about the statistician that drowned in the river that was on average 30 centimeters deep, right? So if you don't know how to swim and there's a sign that says, this river is on average 30 centimeters deep, what do? You take the bridge, right? Because you can't cross the water, you don't know. It's about statistical relevance, okay? And that's the veracity part. That means if you are looking at data sets that you want to bring in which are not formally managed, like a feed, like sentiment analysis, what you really need to do is you have to understand that the veracity and that the cleansing is to a point that is ready to make a decision. If your GPS says take a right, what do? You close your eyes and take a right? Not really, because the veracity of that decision go right sometimes is not to the point that it says, it's helping me, but it's not my formal decision. Now, I would ask you another question. If you're in your office and you are making a business decision because the system says that you should go right, what is the problem when you're sitting in your office? That is that you can't look out the window and see whether it's actually right that you need to go. So in many cases, you take business decisions, but you don't have the direct feedback that you have when you are looking at the GPS. So the point is the quality of the insight up to the point that you can say, yeah, this is a decision I'm willing to make. Now, this is not a statement, this is a question that I'm asking you. How would you know? How can you bring these things into the point that they make sense? Okay? So, architecture-wise, we're probably going to end up with a mixture of capabilities, and these capabilities will be probably all required if you are having all the business problems that I just explained. So, let's take it a step further and start looking at the ability to create value. Does anybody remember the beer and diapers story? Yes. Okay. So there's some of you that know the urban legend of the beer and diapers. And in a nutshell, this is how we were selling BI 30 years ago, or something like that. Yeah. And so data mining and BI, we've proven that it works because we know that if you put the beer next to the diapers, it will sell better. And it's a whole story. You can read it up. There's a nice article that is actually originated from the Teradata labs when they figure these things out. But the point is that you can get from a sales ticket, you can get insight. Now, if you said, I don't know the beer and diapers, don't worry. This is so 80s, so that's it's too retro. What's the story you need to know about today? It's the Target story. Anybody aware with the Target story? Yes, of course. So what Target did is, there's a gentleman that came to the service desk and he was complaining and he said, well, I'm not happy with your company's ethics because you are sending pregnancy folders and stuff to my daughter. She's under 18 and I don't want this thing to happen because this is not something you do. And I think you owe me an apology. What happens 2 weeks later? The father came back and he said, I have to apologize myself, my daughter is indeed pregnant. So what happened is that Target predicted, based on the buying pattern of the daughter, that she was pregnant and send her direct marketing. So that's the new beer and diaper story. So what it says, and does anybody know why Target would be interested in people having babies? Because that's when you change your buying decisions. If you can get a customer at that point, you're with them, and yeah. Absolutely. You have the coupons and you have a customer, at that point they will stick with you for a few years. So it's a great thing to do. So your ability to do that is really a selling point. So great job, everybody's happy. So what they did is they created value by better understanding the customer journey. They better understand who you are so we can do targeted marketing. Okay, interesting story. And there's probably other examples. Actually, it was on the front page of the New York Times magazine, so everybody was happy about it. And there's lots of stuff going on that does similar things. One of my fellow countrymen, he was able to have an algorithm that uses Twitter feeds to predict the stock market. He was actually better with the Twitter feeds than most of the analysts. So you see, by just looking at the sentiment, you can predict what the market is doing. And there's plenty of examples, and I would probably say that the most well-known person in his domain is Nate Silver, because he was the one that sort of predicted the US elections and figuring out who was going to win. So there's lots of examples of algorithms trying to say, give me a data set and I can give you insight, I can understand what is going on. So what you see is that there's this very interesting workshops for algorithms for modern massive data sets. These are all long sentences that I don't know how to pronounce, and I think you have to go longer to school to actually understand what is going on there. But there's a lot of things happening in the mathematical space. Now, when you look at these algorithms, they're basically two things. And you probably say, why is he talking about algorithms? Because I want to talk about which people you need to hire. What do you need in your organization? And there's two ways of doing it. There's people that have an algorithm, and they will use any data set. So these are the mathematicians, and they say, give me a data set, I don't care what it is, and I will help you make sense of it. So this is where the science, the algorithm, is actually leading. And this is where we see this new term of people saying, I'm a data scientist, basically says, I understand the algorithms, and I can handle all kinds of problems. I can do cluster analysis, I can do impact, and I can do all kinds of fancy algorithms. Okay? Now, what you need to do there is you need to give these people the place and room to experiment, because they don't know the outcome yet. You need to give them a data set and they will experiment. So the point is, bring your website data, give it to them, and they will see if they can make sense of it. And this is where we see new terms emerging, such as a sandbox or playground or stuff like that, where you can experiment and try to get insight. So this is the first way of doing that. These people typically don't understand your business. They can just detect patterns in data. There's a second way of doing it, and this is, I would say, the more interesting for most companies. That is where you actually truly understand the business process. The example we just gave about the fact that if somebody is pregnant, you want to bring them on board as a customer. No data scientist will actually come with that insight. That is an insight that comes from the business point of view. So you look for the data to test your hypothesis and not the other way around. So there's two different kinds. In one case, it's pure mathematical algorithm based. In the other one, it really requires you to understand the business. So when you start hiring people, you have to look at what profile am I looking at? Am I looking at the one which is the pure mathematical? Or am I looking at somebody that is more understandable of what the business is trying to offer? So make sure that you're looking for the right person in that area. So as I said, it's a multidisciplinary approach where you just don't need the mathematically gifted, but you also need to have people that understand how your business model works and what are the points in which you can influence the decision of the buyer. Buy more, buy less, when, where, and how do these things evolve. Okay, so make sure you have the right people on board. There's another thing which is happening. I'm from the age where I actually was looking at rows and columns. If you try to print a terabyte, it's really hard to do that in rows and columns. I try to do the Excel fit on page, but it just gets black, right? So another area that you need to invest in is not the storage, not the calculation, but it's in the visualization. So what we see in the market happening today is companies that are focusing not on managing the data, but presenting it. And this is a fundamental new discipline that says, how can we use our cognitive capacity? There's a lot of processing power up here, and we have capabilities of, from a visual point of view and from an insight point of view. By presenting it correctly, you might get an insight, which is not something that the machine will tell you, but it allows you to navigate, it allows you to truly understand what is going on, right? So there's a good book about information is beautiful that helps you to figure out what are the different trends there, but it's about visualization and presenting it in a way that it actually makes sense. Not just a chart or a simple Excel column by row, no, something that allows you to touch it and to navigate it and to actually get the insight from the visualization. Okay, target, everybody was happy with target? We need to do target as well? And then we were mid-December. In mid-December 2013, what happened? The shares of Target dropped by 2%. Why? Because their great algorithm that figures out when women are pregnant had a data breach. So the point of sale was hacked and the data was cut out. So the Target shares dropped. So this is sort of this other side of the angle where you're saying, oh, wait a minute. Actually, this thing is backfiring now on them because people are no longer comfortable that Target is handling their data properly. And anybody that handles credit cards probably knows about the PCI standards. Well, the point is, did they apply the PCI standards? Not really. Which means that at the same time, when you have data, it is a liability. And then this is one of the things that you need to think about. How are you going to govern that? Because what you need to do is you need to give the data set to the data scientist, right? You would be surprised how many companies have strict data privacy and data security rules, and then the next thing they do is to copy all of their operational system into the sandbox, where then the data scientist is going to play with it. And this is where you get the data breaches. So be careful, because this is not just a huge potential for value creation. At the same time, it is a huge risk if you do not govern it properly. So now we're talking about life cycle. How long do you keep it? Who can have access to it? Should I make things anonymous? We had a huge scandal in Belgium because our metro system, they moved to digital passes. And what they did is they used the information of every passenger going through the system to do better planning. Everybody would go, great, value creation. What is the next thing that happened? They were in the newspaper. Why? Because they forgot to anonymize who is doing what. So people in their data science department could now understand each individual and what they were doing. So it's not just about the potential, but it's also about making sure that you anonymize things, that you are not into issues with privacy. And this is not just about, oh, I'm okay, I'm not the NSA. No, this is about actually fundamentally respecting your customers and making sure that you get the value, but you keep the risk under control. So those are typically always correlated. So what I'm trying to argue is that when you start looking at your data, all the different kinds of data, that you really have a policy that governs what am I going to do with it? how can I deal with retention, what data sets are useful, and who can have access to it, and also the other way around, what potential are we missing? So the point is, and this is sort of my closing arguments here trying to say, is that as an organization, as I said, you want to move from a process-centric organization to an information-centric organization. But it means that you have to have a clear view of what data is available, what can make sense of it, who can make sense of it, and how data should be governed. What are the quality rules, what are the retention rules, what are the security rules that you have to deal with? Because if you don't do that, this will be a disaster. You will be the next company in the newspaper. And that's not what you want. Well, you can be there because the shares went up 2% because you were predicting when people were pregnant. But that's not the essence. The essence is, how are you achieving this and how are things going on? So the point is, you have to agree what you have, what you're going to do with it, figure out who's going to own it, because even if there's an outside ownership, somebody should govern it, somebody should take care of what is happening with the data sets, who can deal with it and what they can do with it. And understand why you are doing it, because it's not about just keeping it for the sake of keeping it. Okay, so we're not creating the library in Constantinople, because that's not the point. We're trying to keep data for the sake of actually making sense of it. And if you don't know how to make sense of it, get rid of it. Does anybody know how much it costs to give a gigabyte to a lawyer? And this is not a joke. It's roughly 2,000 euros. And Philips figured that one out because they were slapped by the European Commission with the antitrust lawsuit. And they, unfortunately, kept too much stuff. So they spent a fortune on data that had to be sifted through by lawyers, which was basically pointless, but the volume was there and costing them an enormous amount of money. So understand why you're keeping it, what your objectives are, and do it from a business point of view, not from a technical point of view, right? So understand that when things are created, they're up to date, they're maintained, and they're disposed at the point that it makes sense. So that life cycle should actually be governed. So what do we learn from this? What are the conclusions? First of all, you have to be very careful for superfluous conclusions, because sometimes the story is not exactly the way it looks like. So if somebody says, oh, I'm doing big data, are you? No, 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 I'm not doing big data. Well, maybe you're actually doing the right thing, because if you don't have a business driver for that, it's not necessarily going to work. So the point is, what I would like you to do is think about an information strategy, and the ultimate question that you should take back to your office later is, when you look at your organization, and remember that question, what is happening in a minute in your organization? What things are you capturing, and are you making sense of it? That's one thing. So do you truly understand, if your boss says, I want to double my revenue, have you clearly identified what are the information ways of improving that? And there's a lot of things that you can do today to actually take the data sets that you have and make more sense of it. There's a huge potential out there. But to actually make sense of it, we have to understand that, does it support my business strategy? There's a nice saying in French, it's called l'art pour l'art. And I see a lot of things happening there. Basically, it translates into art for the sake of art. Now, I'm not saying that art always has to be functional, but you see a lot of people doing big data, oh, because it's nice to do so. And then the question is, how does it add to your bottom line? Silence. Okay, so the point is, what am I missing? What can I do it? I'm also advocating a holistic information management approach that says, don't think in cubicles. Because it is not just about the big data. If your data scientist doesn't know how to get the sentiment and link the sentiment to customer classification, or link the sentiment to product, it's pointless, because you just have sentiment that is nowhere to go. So it means that you also have to do the master data management in a way that you can use these hierarchies to actually make sense of it. So don't think of it as different silos. It has to be a holistic point of view. Which brings us to the point that we have to start looking at capability-driven. Don't say, yes, I would like to buy 4 big datas, please. And I think they have to be green, right? So that's, no. What you need is, you need a platform where you can do massive parallel processing, because I don't like your answer of, I need to wait 18 months. And I don't like the answer in 3 days, because this data scientist guy is an expensive one, so I need to iterate on that. And these people typically learn by something which is called incremental insight. And what does an incremental insight means? You learn from your mistakes and you improve, so you get the cycle going. So make sure that you have the right capabilities. And make sure that there are so many data onboarding capabilities. There's data sets that you can buy. There is a huge market out there which has a lot of potential. So look outside your own organization and see if there's any value in there. And of course, beware of that total cost of ownership. As I said, bringing things on board is not a problem, but it's always a liability. There's a cost dimension of it. And I'm not calling about just the storing, because everything you keep has impact on your operations. So basically, mind the data gap and make sure that there is no discrepancy between what you have and where you want to go to. And that was my last slide, which means that we have 4 or 5 minutes for questions, if there are any in the audience. So anybody? Yes? Do we have a microphone? Yes.
Reference to all your what you call data analysis to identify the data that is actually useful for the business. Reference to the example for the telephone company and the target and all that, okay? And the backfire for the Belgian metro system. So to what extent is it acceptable to dig into data without breaching privacy? I mean, you gave example for Belgian, for examples out there, and lawyers and whatever. But I mean, there's something called governance and business morals that we need to look depending on the region that you're doing business in.
Absolutely. So that's a very good question. Where do the ethics and the standard meet each other? And what I typically see is that people are starting from their company values, because there's two things. There's actually legislation. So can you go to jail for doing things? Typically, if you're government, they don't throw you in jail. You just get into the newspaper. But in a private company, you have to be careful. So there's more and more pressure on that from a legislation point of view. But I think the most interesting angle is your own ethical angle from a company point of view. We worked with a retailer, and retailer looked at the target model, and they said, we don't want to do this. We can, but we will not do it. Because we think that the bonding with our customer and our company values are such that we don't want to invade or even give them the impression that we invade their privacy. Because targeted marketing can be sometimes scary. One of my colleagues, she's a lady, she's 60 years old, and she likes to clean her hands with these baby washes, so these little things so to keep her hands clean. She got a target mailing for buying diapers because they cross-sell the product to diapers. And that's a very good example. And that retailer, for that particular reason, says, we're not going to do that. So I would say my main driver for you is to look at your own company ethics and saying, what is your value and what do you think should be done and what shouldn't be done. Bottom line is legislation, which means that in some cases you have to make the data anonymous. But then again, that's a slippery slope, because at what point does it get anonymous? It's like saying, I'm not going to say my salary, but I know that I have a 1% increase and that was 100 euros. We see the same thing by people making data anonymous. And they say, oh, yeah, this is anonymous, because I don't know who's in the street. But there's only one person living there with two children and one car. So again, legislation is one thing, but where do you want to be as a company, as values? Now, there's not necessarily a contradiction in the two. There's a lot of things that you can do, but you have to be really careful on setting that, drawing that boundary. And I would say that's essentially your boundary. And then the bottom line is legislation, but that is, in most cases, always too low. Yes? Another question? Yeah, first there and then I'll come there.
My first question is about the system engineering. How would system engineering affect the whole big data management? And the second thing, I can say for the ethics, it's a function of time and factors to the human culture and the human nature.
Mhm.
So we'll buy time with something might be not ethical today, might be ethical tomorrow, or it's different.
Okay, so let me answer the first one, which is about the system engineering and support that. And this is what I was saying with the data scientist model. There's two approaches. There's the capabilities, having the algorithm looking for the data. And there's lots of opportunities today because we come up every day with more power, more capacity. So in many cases, the system engineering is actually leading the field instead of the business leading the field. So that's a very good point, that being in touch. So actually every company should have a data technology watch function, that you go out there and you proactively probe for what is happening, because a lot of things are happening in the industry. The second thing about the morality being variable in time, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, because I would say that the morality is a fundamental element of your organization. And the point is that when you look at privacy and what people are willing to give up, it's scary to see what my children are doing compared to what I was doing. So I would say reality is proving your point, but it's not influencing the way that I'm thinking. But it's a very good point. Yes, we had one more question over there.
Is there a specific definition of privacy? Because I don't think there is a privacy today in our world. Just, for example, if you're in a state, I need two single information about you, your name and your company, or your name, your wife name. I can build with all information we have, like all your life story and.
Mm-hmm. I think your question is alluding to the previous statement that was made. Today, I think if I would look at a good definition of privacy, the work that is recently done by the European Commission sets a very good level of standards of how to behave. So if you're interested in what is happening legislation-wise, the Data Protection Act is not totally passed yet, but that is something that I would consider to be an industry standard on how to behave.
Your information already there, our information already there. How can you?
Well,
whatever they set a standard, it's
yes.
already there. They come up with a privacy issue after we give our information.
Yeah. Then you have to go back and revisit your data and saying, are we compliant? So I would actually recommend you to go back and look, are we in sync with that, and what are we keeping and what are we not keeping? So that's, to me, that would be a benchmark to look at the Data Privacy Act and look at one as a yardstick to do that. Yes?
Actually, I'm having a question relating to dealing with the data. Usually, in many cases, we're dealing with existing data. Mm-hmm. Especially in analyzing the data, mining the data, and so on. And that makes a difference from scientific research, where usually they identify the attributes and the data that we need to use in analyzing and developing the data, and drawing the conclusion out of it. So is there any work in identifying such data, ranking, for example, the information of that you need to consider in terms of mining, analyzing, then drawing your conclusion?
Yes. Yeah. So I think you actually made a point, and the point that you're making is the one that I was trying to, when I was describing the data scientist, that there's basically two ways of looking at it, saying what you have, and the other one is I have the algorithm. My experience is that this is really sector specific. So what you need to do is to look for your own peers in the industry, because it starts all the way back from what is your business driver. If you want to increase the selling, then what are the measurement points that I can do? So that's a reverse reasoning to actually say, what is my outcome? I want to increase the capability. I want to have a bigger basket, for example. And this is where most of the research that is being done is very sector specific. This is not just the algorithm. So I would strongly encourage you to look at the sector-specific solutions rather than just the mathematical capabilities of drawing things. Because as you clearly pointed out, the question is not what are my algorithms, it is what measurement points actually influence that. Now this is again where I was saying this is sort of a continuous cycle, because it's like building a balanced scorecard. When people start with balanced scorecards, they have 65 indicators, 200 indicators. And once you mature, what you do is you bring it down to the 10 or 20 that make sense. You will see exactly the same thing. You can have all the feeds, but you probably realize, and this is what Nate Silver calls the noise. sure that you don't capture stuff that doesn't actually contribute. But that's really sector specific and depends on the drivers that you're looking for. So I would start from that angle. Okay? Okay? So I would like to thank you for your attention and physical collaboration.
Thank you. Next session, Mohammed Attiya from Datability.
Hello? Yep, okay. I hope you've enjoyed the morning so far and it was a good learning experience for you. I was asked to summarize the 13 years of data management projects that we've done in the country, and I come up with 13 guidelines that I will share with you. This does not mean that we learn one thing every year, of course. It actually, on the contrary, it means those 13 lessons have been the same for the past 13 years. And they keep repeating themselves. Can we switch to the screen? Yes, thank you. When your organization is trying to buy furniture, tables, chairs, cupboards, you have a very specific description of what you're trying to buy. You have a team who will procure it. You have a team who will save it. You have a team who will maintain it. You know who wants to use it, how he's going to use it. And when you're done with it, you know where to take it to. This is furniture. Why you do this? Because it's an asset. Why don't we do the same with data? We acquire the data haphazardly. Haphazardly meaning, there's no need, it's okay, fine, I'm fine with it, thank you. We acquire the data without necessary specific rules on how the data should look like, how we should collect it. The data is available through Excel, basically to everyone, to do anything they want with it. And when they do things with it, it's very hard to track what happened to the data, contrary to my furniture. And we still say that data is the best or second best asset of the organization. Well, of course, this happens for a reason, because data is not tangible, number one. And two, there's much, much, much more data than we have furniture. So it's very difficult to manage. But that only makes the problem bigger and puts constraint to start sooner. Consider non-data projects. An ERP implementation, or a trade finance application in a bank, or a claim processing application in a telco company or an insurance company. How much time do you spend looking at functionalities that you want in the new application, compared to how much time you look at the data that is required for this functionality to operate? As a result, how many of you think that the technology utilization of all the applications in the organization is more than 90%? 80%? 60%? 50%? Come on. I hope there's no finance people here. We don't look at the data, period. We look at functionality of applications. When there is a data management project or initiative, it always starts with, we want to implement a data warehouse. We want to install BI. And if we want to get a bit more business-oriented, we want to clean our data. Therefore, we want to buy a tool to clean the data. It's always thinking of software, of the tool. Consider Ministry of Education. I came across that news a while back, a couple of months back. They want to look at optimization of the whole transportation of female teachers from and to work and female students, from and to schools and female students. They wanted to optimize the whole system. Now, do you think the wise way to go about this is to start looking at specifications of buses which bus has more seats, which bus has more cylinders, which bus has more options, and so on. Does that solve the problem, the ecosystem problem, the full solution? It is just a component of the solution. And so is the tool. And in the data management, there are tens, actually hundreds of tools. So selecting a tool based on capability alone can take you a year and a half. The guideline number 1, treat data like furniture. Know where you are going to get it from, who's going to use it, why he wants to use it, how he's going to use it, who can change it, where is it going to go afterward, what do I do when I'm done with it? And this is a huge exercise. So I'm not suggesting you do it in one go. So that's the first guideline. Second guideline. Do not lead data projects as IT. Do not. If the business is not leading it, don't do the project. We have seen in 13 years more than 100 projects fail. Fail, I mean money spent and wasted. Fail, I mean the objective was to build a skyscraper and we ended up with 3 huts. That's what I mean by fail. Why? Because you are not the user. You are not the consumer of the product. The product of the data management project is the business. If the business doesn't know what they want to look at and how they want to look at it and how they want to use it, there is no point in doing it. Do not be enthusiastic about the capabilities of tools. I want to get this and I want to get that, let's do this, let's do that. The business doesn't know. Tough luck. If the business doesn't know, he will not use. And if he doesn't use, you just wasted money and effort. And actually, you become more depressed. And maybe that's why the reason most of the IT people are depressed these days. They do projects that get to waste. But you're starting on the wrong foot. In any data project, there is always a debate. Do we start bottom up or top down? Bottom up or top down? And this roller coaster doesn't end. As a matter of fact, you need both. You need the top down from the senior executive of the organization, be it the minister, the deputy minister, the CEO, the CXO, to give the commitment to push and also the financial commitment, and the commitment should be sustainable. Because the project takes 6 months, 1 year. It takes 6 months from when we deploy the first resource on the ground. But a year and a half before that, you are thinking about data, looking at tools and issuing RFPs and evaluating vendors and. So it's a year and a half to 2 years before you actually, from idea to light. So you need executive sponsorship for sure. And executive sponsorship, I don't mean that if it's the minister, as big as that title is, wants this data, he should be, or somebody with authority representing him should be on the steering committee of the project. That's what I mean by commitment. Not a nice email, guys, we have this project, let's focus on it. Oops, that's not commitment. The bottom up, which is very, very usually forgotten. You need to build awareness for what you're doing. You need to communicate what we are doing, why we are doing it, how useful it is to you. And I go as far as please cut the tool evaluation time by half and dedicate that time with a marketing consulting company that has nothing to do with IT to do internal marketing for you for the project so the people get become anticipating, get excited and waiting for the project to come and the output of that. And when they become excited, of course, they start feeding their knowledge, feeding their enthusiasm to you, help you get the project done. That's the guideline number 3. Guideline number 4. It's not what's out there in the market. It's what you can do. Do I have the technical skills? Because when I say what you can do, I'm sure most of you said, okay, technical skills. Yeah, sure. That's not it. Do I have the user buy-in? Do I have the data? Do you know how much time is spent in any data project finding the data? When I say finding, I mean knowing where it is, what it means, what do you want to do with it. It's 70% of the project. So don't jump too quickly into things that might harm your health without carefully and in detail assessing your capability, your maturity as an organization. Many organizations are not even application mature yet, let alone data mature. This model by Robert Grossman is one of the models that depicts how organizations are ready. What's the readiness of the organization? Most of the organizations I have seen here in the region, in the analytical reporting. They have reports either through some BI tools or data visualization reporting tool or Excel and so on. Very few we've worked with, very few, and they are mainly banks and telco operators that are in the analytical modeling, where they have some models that predict revenue, that predict customer churn, that predict profit, that do cross-selling, upselling, and stuff like that. Very, very few. But when people select, they want tools that fit in the tip of the pyramid. They select tools that fit in the tip of the pyramid. You're not going to do anything with it. Not you, not the user. Guideline number 5. Pick the right tool. It doesn't have to be sophisticated. It cannot be sophisticated for everybody, because not everybody has a sophisticated need. Exactly like we don't all drive buses, for example. Although the bus is arguably bigger than all the cars that we all drive. But it's not what I need. And there are many tools in the data management spectrum, of course, huge number of tools. But what do we do as technology people when we issue an RFP? I look at RFPs and I see, oh, the specs of Oracle, the specs of SAP, the specs of Microsoft, the specs of IBM tools, the specs of ClickView, the specs of Exalead, the specs in one sheet. These are the requirements that we have. You don't need tools. You don't need capabilities. You need to do something. With what tool, that's another story. It's not about getting the biggest and the fittest. And the tools are humongous. They are endless. They're endless. And really, if you look at tools comparable in the same box, 98% of the cases, any tool would do. And I say 98 because there is always a 2% or 5% difference between a tool and another that only very, very advanced customers require when you are in the 3rd or 4th or 5th level of maturity that you need. So don't spend a lot of time which tool is which. That's not the idea. And we're not even looking at the tools only. No, we are looking at the roadmap of the tool. Guys, we are not even using what's there, let alone the roadmap. Guideline number 6, and believe me, I saw it. Not once. Let's bring everything. Put everything in the data warehouse. Even my thoughts in the data warehouse. Even things I didn't think about, put it in the data warehouse. Can we put anything else in the data warehouse? Can we get external data in the data warehouse? What are you doing? You are creating something that's going to eat you. Because everything you put in the data warehouse has transformation, transportation, loading, metadata, data management, data maintenance, and. You want to do all of this without knowing what you are going to do with it? No. If you don't know what you are doing this for, drop the project. It's not a good project. You're wasting your life, then you are wasting the organization's money. We must spend time knowing what we want to do. It's not about collecting everything and putting it in one place. And this is for IT people who try to get the buy-in. The user is already dreaming. Please don't fuel that dream further. He already has expectations. You need to bring it down. And I'm talking about cases that happened even a couple of weeks ago with one of our customers. You're going to be able to do this. You know, I will not be able to do this until I see this information, this information, this information, and I have this resource, and this resource, and this resource, and I take this action, and I have this authority to take the action. So you actually cannot do this. It's like I tell you, you can fly. Yeah. Provided 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 700,000 things that happen, yes, I can fly. Be very realistic when you're managing expectation of your users. Actually, sorry, be realistic in managing your own expectations. Because you also have expectations that the user is committed. I hear that. We hear that. The user is committed. The data is clean. Oh, that's really the funniest part. The data is clean. You can't argue. If you say something else to the guy, it's like you're offending him. And data is not clean. You don't even know what the data is. You have data that is 20 years old in the organization. Somebody created some table, put something in it, and died 10 years ago, and you still have the data. You really don't know what it is. And in one of the very large, actually most successful projects we had, data mining project in one of the large